So we've seen a lot of examples yesterday about where you could show that there was a communication of information within the network, but I don't want you to take from the example that I showed that it's kind of always true. And in fact, there are a lot of examples where it doesn't seem to appear that there is that much social learning happening. And it has to be true because in the model that I showed, where you have a piece of information, you transmit it to some probability to your links, who transmit it again, then eventually everybody would be informed. As long as the probability of transmitting is high enough, everybody will know. And yet, that's not the case. We've seen that there are actually a lot of persistent beliefs that are wrong in developed countries too. But for example, the example I was giving you about fertilizer, that a lot of people think that you should use a full teaspoon of fertilizer when in fact half a teaspoon is enough. People have all sorts of strange ideas about how malaria gets transmitted, etc. So there are a lot of ideas. There's just a lot of information that doesn't seem to circulate. So what can limit diffusion? Well, I think you've already seen that paper in the course of this summer school. People could be hoarding on the wrong information for purely rationally. For completely rational, people could be hoarding on the wrong information simply because they think that other people have a signal and they're going to ignore their own signal when they see that other people do some stuff. They're going to they're going to think that it makes sense to follow what the other people do. And so if there is just by chance someone follows the wrong signal early on, like everybody could go to the wrong place. Another thing that could happen is that people forget pieces of information, and there you can write a very simple epidemiological model of transmission where you can have multiple steady states. So let me sketch the model just verbally for you. We have a situation where, so suppose you have farmers and a new technology gets introduced, and they could decide to discuss it with their friends or not to discuss it with their friends. And there is some cost of communication. So communication is not free. Either you have to talk to people, you don't like to talk to them, or you might, instead of talking about soccer, you have to talk about fertilizer, and that's boring. So for whatever reason, having this conversation is costly. Okay? So the question is, so you could be in a situation, and then so add to that, and then when you have a conversation, you transmit your piece of information with some probability, and then that information is relevant with some probability, is valuable to the receiver with some probability. And then people who have a piece of information, either because it was injected to them or because someone gave it to them through the network, can also forget, or they can die. The piece of information, then the information vanishes. Now, you could be in a situation where people tend to pay the cost of talking. So people pay the cost of talking, they talk a lot. So information gets passed on before it's being forgotten. And therefore, there is a lot of information to discuss, and therefore it's worthwhile talking. So there you would be in an equilibrium where there is going to be a lot of discussion and a lot of innovation, and people will continue to discuss a lot because there is a lot of innovation in the background, and innovation will stay because people discuss and pass it on before they forget about it. Conversely, so for some parameter, that's the only equilibrium that exists, but for some parameter, you have people, if the information is not very valuable, people don't talk to each other very much. The information gets forgotten. There is not much innovation in the society and not much discussion. And for some parameter, that's the only equilibrium that exists. But then there is a region in between where the two steady states are possible, where if people talk a lot, there is enough information in the system to justify people talking a lot, and therefore there is a lot of innovation, a lot of discussion. But if people don't talk enough, the information dies before people have a chance to pass it on. So there is not much information in the system, therefore that it's not worth talking a lot. So you could have, in very similar societies, situations where people talk a lot to each other, there is a lot of innovation, a lot of diffusion, and situation where there is no discussion, no innovation.
Is there a reference?
There is a sort of reference, yes. It's I'll show you. It's sort of coming. It's kind of this never-endless, never-ending working paper that I'll talk to more in a minute, that we have with John Robinson, Michael Kramer, and Frank Silver. It was to explain a fact that I'll show you, or to explain at least to ourselves a fact that I'll show you in a minute. Another thing that can happen is that some pieces of information are you would rather keep for yourself, because if it's shared to other people, they might share into the good opportunity, and you might not want that. So, for example, if it's a kind of a new business opportunity, you might not want to share it to your friends, even if it's. So it could be because you're competing on a market, or it could be because you're competing for some silly social status reasons or whatever. So you could have a farmer being very pleased with their new peat planting technology, but not wanting to share the details how it works because he wants to stay on top, or he wants to stay the big man. So I think you've seen with Adam their paper on business groups, on getting people to talk to each other, getting little farms or middle farm in China to talk to each other. They have an example where they pass a piece of information that is rival, in the sense that it's kind of a lottery opportunity. So if I get it, you don't get it, and vice versa. And they show that in this, the rival piece of information, people do not transmit to their friends in the network. And more information might be rival than we think, in the sense that even when there is no obvious sense of competition, for example, say farmers producing maize who are clearly price taker in the market, so you would think there is no reason for there to be competition. There might still be competition in terms of social ranking, social status, or whatnot. Another thing that made a quick apparition in the gossip paper, perhaps, I don't know if Matt talked about it, is that I think in some cases people are just not willing to pass a piece of information when they're not sure. You know, any piece of information, in a lot of cases, piece of information is just a signal. There is a lot of, so think about the input choices, for example. It's just, you do know that there is, variability around what's the optimal use of fertilizer. Even for yourself, you just have some guess of what the optimal use of fertilizer might be. You know that this guess might be wrong, and it might be even wronger for someone else. You know that. And people might be reluctant to pass on a piece of information when the information is too uncertain. So I don't know if you remember in the gossip paper that Matt presented, less than half the people venture a guess. Now, in our model, everyone should have a guess of who the gossips are. So in principle, everybody should have said someone. But in fact, less than half the people, a big third, 38%, I think, are willing to say something.
In principle, you could not only pass on a piece of information,
but the noise is...
Yeah, an assessment of the noise.
Yes, so in principle, you could do that. So as an empirical matter, I think this is, you can see that people, so in this case, for example, in gossip, it seems to be that people put a threshold, and they never tell us, I think this is this person, but by the way, you'd have to take this with a grain of salt because I'm not very connected and I really don't know anybody or whatnot. Maybe it is difficult to have this kind of conversation. There are extended conversation. And in fact, I'll elaborate on that in a minute. There is another paper by Banerjee, Arun Chandrasekhar Rimahan, and Ben Olken, where they are trying to look at how people learn from each other, how people learn about each other's wealth in the village. And they have the same result, that there seems to be a pretty strong threshold below which people are not willing to tell an investigator or anybody what they think the ranking of someone else in the network is. And that seems to be related with how confident they are in the information. Now, why are they not doing that? What Eric suggested, to say, well, I'm giving you my piece of information, I'm giving you the mean and the confidence interval around this mean, or how certain I am. something which I think is happening, but at this level that's just an intuition, is that in a lot of settings people do not want to be blamed for if anything goes wrong. So basically it is difficult to transmit information with the, with a credible, clear sense of how that you're not completely sure of the piece of information. And then if you say something to someone that they should do that, and then it turns out that the bet is that it doesn't go down that well, then people are worried that they are going to be blamed for and accused of having willfully misled the person. So in Kenya, where I've done a lot of work on fertilizer adoption and on diffusion, it seems to be something that is happening. So let me give you a bit more detail on that. That's a sort of paper to be. That's why it is question mark. With Michael Kramer, John Robinson, Franz Silber, where we've been working now for a long time in Kenya trying to understand fertilizer diffusion, how people learn about fertilizer. So what you need to know about fertilizer in Kenya, this is fertilizer for maize plots, and it's a very old technology. It's been around forever. So it doesn't have the excitement of this is to grow maize for your own plot. It doesn't have the excitement of pineapple growing, etc. The second thing that you need to remember is what I said yesterday, which is there's a lot of misinformation. There are 2 official recommendations floating around, and one of them comes to 1 teaspoon of fertilizer per plot, and one of them comes to a half. Our experiments suggest that 1 is way too much because the production function is very concave, so you don't get much of an increase in yield between a half and a full teaspoon, but of course you've paid twice as much. But that is something that agricultural stations don't seem to necessarily have in mind. They seem to often maximize yield as opposed to maximizing profit. Yeah.
You didn't mention the status of established habits, which seems to be a very important factor of resisting any change. The old generation say no, they did it right their own way.
Right.
If they accept the change, it means that they're now on equal status with the newer, younger people, which they don't like the idea. So
right, that's a
they
good
tend to not to exactly resist, but
not yeah. No, that's true. That's true. That you could just discard information because you are attached to whatever your prior is, or something like that. So maybe I'll show to some extent that would suggest that people find it very difficult to learn even from their own experience. So we can try and distinguish the 2. So what we did here is that the first thing we did is we did experiments on people's plots. So we chose, we worked with some, we randomly, we took a list of farmers, like a complete list of farmers from parents in a school, in several schools. Then we randomly selected some farmers, and on those farmers, we asked them to demarcate some plots, little plots about the size of this stage, and either 2 or 3. One was a control plot, one was a demo plot and with a half teaspoon, and one was a demo plot with a full teaspoon of fertilizer. Depending on the year, we tried various plots. And then when we had the 3 plots demarcated, we randomly selected where to put which treatment. Okay? So what this was is for the farmer who got, and then we had given the farmers the fertilizer to put the fertilizer on. So what this was is for the farmer an occasion to experiment on their own, and to also see if on their own what the yield of using fertilizer. We were then harvesting together and shelling the maize together and counting the weight, so they could see, and then doing the calculation of what was the extra return, and also sharing the information from the other plots or previous plots in previous years. So it's a kind of very heavy-duty agricultural extension for that farmer, if you want. Then in the second round and then we followed the adoption of these people and their friends, their agricultural contacts that we had elicited before over several years. So I'll show you the result of that first. Then we did But I'll show you the result of that. Why don't I show you that right now? This is the effect of having the demonstration plot, having had a demonstration plot on whether you're using fertilizer in the next season. You can see that the use of fertilizer is very low. It's about 16% in this thing. But people who had gotten a demo plot are 12 percentage points more likely to use fertilizer the next season, 2 seasons after, 3 seasons after. So it seems that they are learning something, and having participated in the demo plot led them to change their habits. So coming to your opinion, it's not that people necessarily are resistant to change because they seem to be just doing it more. Yeah.
How much would the compliance?
On the so yeah, so everybody did it. Yes, it's kind of sort of at the minimum, it's kind of fun. It's a very small amount of land, and we give them the fertilizer anyway, and it's kind of so there was it was people kind of seem to enjoy that. So this was think that being in a treatment group is basically being treated. So people who participated in demo plot, they got it even though they got no further service in the following years, adopt more, seemingly quite reliably. But now if we look at their friends, remember these are the people who were that they told us, do you discuss fertilizer with these people? So this is equivalent of the Conley Udry farmers. We find absolutely no diffusion. No diffusion. So one possibility is that, well, all the work before us was not randomized, and there was something that was fishy in their identification, and this is, the truth, and there is in fact no diffusion. But another possibility is that it really depends on the context, and I think it's more likely to be that. One thing that is useful to interpret that, so this is kind of a nice, clear zero, and we kept, this is the result of several seasons of doing it again, because we didn't believe it the first time, and but now by now we have a lot of demonstration farmers, friends of demonstration farmers and friends of farmers, and we really don't find anything on the friends or on the geographic neighbors. So what we did to try to find out is to invite. So one possibility when you see this result is that maybe in this particular context you cannot learn from your neighbor because it is so specific that the information on the neighbor's plot is not relevant to me. So what we did is we invited some neighbors to come and show I'll be with you in a minute, to come and witness the demo plot. About half of them showed up. So here you have a compliant thing. And there, a farmer who was invited to come, regardless of whether he come or not, the next year, their adoption is larger. So it doesn't happen on their plot. It happens on a neighbor's, on a friend's plot, but yet their adoption is larger. And if we instrument for people who actually came, to take into account the compliance, is actually 26%. A farmer who actually came and witnessed the treatment is 26% more likely to adopt, even though it was not on their plot. So it is possible to learn from your neighbor in this context, but what seems to be the case is people just are not learning from their neighbor. So what we did then is to start asking them questions about. So let me stop here. Take your question, then your question. Yeah.
So a bit then, like isn't the first story is also consistent with the story that they adopt super fast because it's relative to long people without.
Yeah, no, the adoption is very low. The usage the usage is 21% in the comparison group. So usage is very low. Yep.
And maybe they deceived you when you were talking, said to discuss it with someone.
Yeah, so exactly. So that told us the people who were supposed to talk to about agriculture. So we were like, oh, maybe they're really not talking about agriculture with these people. So we went and asked questions about the other guys' practice. So like, when did your friend? So you said that Eric. You said that Ethan was your friend. When did he plant? And then Ethan, you said Eric was your friend. When did he plant? And we realized people have no clue. So they mentioned the people who were supposed to be their agricultural contact and people they really talk to about agriculture, but they have no idea. of who they just have no idea what the other people are doing. So they don't share information. So one possibility, which I must say had not occurred to me till now, is that they just gave us these completely random people who are not at all their friends. But the other possibility is that these are kind of their friends, but they are not talking to each other about agriculture. And we ask questions about other things, like health questions and things like that. And we find people know much more about other things. For example, does your friend kids sleep under a bed net? And vice versa. They know this type of things, but they don't seem to know about agriculture. So these people, well, they don't discuss agriculture, even though they were mentioned to be their agricultural contact. So that's kind of what motivated us to write the little model that I sketched verbally a moment ago. Yeah. Yeah, so the people who have come to witness, they've come to witness all the key stages. So they've come to witness the moment where we harvest and take out and measure the yield. So the guys who have come to witness have seen everything, and the guys who have not come to witness, they know nothing, is kind of our bottom line. So there seemed to be very little communication, like kind of in the wild, happening between these people. So we were kind of bothered about that, surprised by that, and we decided to do some more work there. So in the second round experiment, we did two things. Basically, what would have influenced, under the little model that I sketched verbally before, what would have sped out adoption or discussion is, if the innovation is more valuable, you're more likely to switch to the zone where talking is the only steady state. And when you reduce the cost of talking, you're also more likely that people will talk to each other. So we introduced two interventions. One was coupons, which are basically discount on the price of fertilizer. And the other is use the existing social network they have. They meet in groups often to talk about various things. We try to encourage them to talk about agricultural practices by giving them, by paying for the sodas and the snacks in those meetings, as long as they gave us an agenda that they had talked about agriculture. So we're trying to encourage discussion about agriculture. And then on top of that, we tried to introduce a technology that we could follow up over that we could easily follow how it had diffused. And so we introduced this very high-tech instrument called the blue spoon, which is basically a kitchen measuring spoon. So we bought this entire set of kitchen measuring spoon from the US, brought them to Kenya, and extracted the half teaspoon. Since, as I showed you, people tend to believe 1 teaspoon of fertilizer should be used when a half is better for most people. So we picked randomly selected farmers all over the area, and we gave them a blue spoon, which is a measuring this, which we painted the spoon in blue, the half teaspoon in blue, so people wouldn't use it for like serving tea or something. So it was a measuring kitchen with half teaspoon. So when, just to give you a sense, a lot of people think that 41% of people who have not received the blue spoon think that a full teaspoon of fertilizer should be used on a plot. This is an answer to how much fertilizer should you use. 41% thinks it should be a full teaspoon, and 35% it should be a half teaspoon, which is the correct sum. And the people who got the blue spoon are quite a bit more likely to say it should be a half teaspoon, and less likely to say it should be a teaspoon or more. So in terms of people who got the blue spoon understood you can use less fertilizer. So what we are interested in is to show this blue spoon was given to the farmer for free, and then they were told that they were available in the shop for a very small amount of money, not zero, but like 5 shillings, very small amount of money. And they should tell their friends that it's available. If they like the technology, they can go and get it. So we were interested in whether that, in tracking down the diffusion of using fertilizer at all, and this particular technology, which is easier to track. Okay, this is what I already showed you. And what was striking, actually, to us, so remember we were thinking about this context where people are not discussing technologies, and we had this idea the farmers not talk about agriculture and why, and can this be moved by moving this cooperative of these coupons. But the striking fact is that people diffuse the blue spoon. So the blue spoon was, and our idea is that in the basic condition, people don't talk about agriculture, so they are not going to talk about, they are not going to diffuse the blue spoon, but maybe the coupons or the cooperative will make the blue spoon move around. But in fact, the blue spoon move around just fine. So in the same context, where people don't talk about, don't seem to copy adopting fertilizer or not, they are really adopting the blue spoon. They are really talking about the blue spoon. So lots of people who are friends of the blue spoon farmers have heard about the blue spoon, and actually quite a few of them went and bought it. And having worked on various kind of technology, from health, from anything, getting anybody to spend any money on anything that you would introduce is very difficult. So this is like, by the standard of what I've done, a huge marketing success that we have. 10% of the friends of the blue spoon farmers went to the shops, paid 5 shillings and got their blue spoons. So in a sense, this was kind of the big surprise. Without doing particularly anything, people seem to really follow the blue spoons.
Have you go again to the houses to see if they are using correctly the blue spoon?
Yeah, so we went, basically we followed lots of people. We asked them these questions about how much fertilizer should be used, etc. So people seem to be using the blue spoon to use fertilizer. We asked them to demonstrate how they apply fertilizer. And then they're more like, if they own a blue spoon, they'll use the blue spoon, etc.
Yes, because normally, for example, for bednet, that is a huge thing.
Well, actually for bednet, let me correct that. People who get a bednet use it correctly. So there is a lot of pictures of people using bednet incorrectly, but if you give a bednet to someone, 95% of people use it correctly. So that in that setting and many others. So we might as well correct the bednet misbelief as we are here.
Maybe just the name was like, so when you talk about blue spoon, yes.
No, it's possible. It's possible. In that case, I should change job because that's I'm the blue spoon. I'm the one who painted them blue. But it's possible that people just find it very cool. Especially there was no space. It's blue spoon.
Seems like they had a lot of uncertainty about the amount of fertilizer that they're supposed to put, and now you actually created a standard, right? It's maybe might not be like marketing more than this is the spoon for, this is the spoon for fertilizer, and this is the new standard that.
Yeah, so actually I think you're exactly right, which is my intuition of what is going on. And right now it is just like, that's my one license that Ben gave me for one thing that was still ongoing. It's the one thing that I think is happening, which is the difference, I think, between, and we have not yet written this up, and we will one day, and hope it actually holds out when you do the math of that. But I think the difference is exactly what you're talking about, which is when I talk to someone about the practice of using fertilizer, I need to tell him how much to use and where to find it and what the yield will be approximately, etc. And he needs to rely on me to convey a lot of information, which I may have, but it's kind of, I need to be able to relay confidence interval and explain to me how it works. With the blue spoon, it's like, it's very simple message and there is an authority behind it. These guys from this, we work with an NGO that is local to the area. These guys from IPA came and they gave me this blue spoon, and you are supposed to use this amount when you're applying top dressing fertilizer. So I think there is two things. The message is very stark, and you can refer the person back to a source of authority in a way that is quite clear, because there is an object that is attached to it. So if they're upset with someone because the quantity of fertilizer was not the right one, they can go back to a complaint to IPA. So I think this is what is happening, which is in a context where people are quite reluctant to share information by fear of being blamed that the information is wrong. They are not going to do it. which means that all sorts of wrong information can continue to float by. And then when finally you have something which is much more specific and can be brought back to a source of authority, that circulates very well. Yeah.
I was just wondering if maybe the presence of the blue spoon in the store sort of signals that everyone's doing this. Like, this is the spoon that's used for fertilizer, so people weren't using fertilizer, but now they think that everyone is using fertilizer.
So you want to know if, so for that, is it the case that people started using more fertilizer after they get, so people who did get a blue spoon were more likely to get, to use fertilizer. So, okay, let me point to another thing before is, another thing that points in this direction is that the people who were in the cooperative together, even if they were not a friend of the blue spoon farmer, they were more likely to adopt the blue spoon. So this is everyone who is in a cooperative, and I've lost the, and this is people who are in a cooperative and who are friend of a blue spoon farmer. And you can see that it doesn't really matter that you were, if you are in a cooperative group if you are in a cooperative group, even if you don't know personally someone who used the blue spoon, you're more likely to use the blue spoon themselves. So it is something that people seem to have been able to discuss in these cooperative groups. Now, direct evidence that people discuss more agriculture with their friends, all of this is a bit small, but these are various things that you discuss with your friend. The people who have the blue spoon report discussing more all of the fertilizer-related topics with their friends, including, of course, blue spoons, but also how much of, what quantity of fertilizer you should use and when to do it, etc. The friend, from the point of view of the friend of the blue spoon, the only thing they remember discussing with their blue spoon friends is the blue spoon. So that's the only piece of information that they remembered from what this guy said, but they remembered very clearly. From the cooperative things, there is just no effect on discussing, of cooperative themselves on discussing agriculture. So it didn't really work, and the coupon treatment didn't really work either. The only thing that the cooperative farmer discussed between themselves is the blue spoon. And in fact, this is what we see, that there is more adoption of fertilizer. Yeah.
Isn't it a story of like science? So basically you give them something to talk about. So it's like the other paper by Kaya and Untitled, so you put the disciplines together, and so they talk about like business practices. So when you give them,
Yeah, so we put them together in cooperative to talk about agriculture, but we failed miserably. So this was our idea. This is cooperative are other business groups, if you want. They were supposed to talk about agriculture, but really they didn't. Like we can't find them talking about anything that is agricultural practices except the blue spoon. So you're right, we gave them something to talk about, but it's not that these are not things that you could talk about, but these are things that they are reluctant to talk about. So whereas in here they were, maybe because it was new, but I think more plausibly because it was clear what you had to talk about. Yep.
A small technical question. Did they actually spread the fertilizer? They spread the fertilizer in the field?
Yeah. Spreading is not a word. This is top dressing fertilizer. So you apply it when the plant is that high, and you apply it hole by hole.
But the farmer did it
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah, of course.
So that's already maybe important.
Oh yeah, but in the demonstration plot they did it themselves. In reality, they do it themselves. Here, all we did is give them the blue spoon and told them how to use it.
Did they have to pay for the fertilizer?
So in the fertilizer demo plot, no. But after that, yes. Like in the demo plot, they didn't pay for the fertilizer. After that, they have to pay. And for the blue spoon, we gave the first blue spoon for free. The other ones they have to pay for some small amount of money.
For the spoon or for the fertilizer?
Both. They have to pay for everything. They have to pay for the spoon and for the fertilizer. Last thing, and then I'll stop, is on this, is to people who got blue spoons are more likely to use fertilizer. And that makes sense because if you are more sure about what quantity to use, you are more sure that it's going to be profitable and you're more likely to use it. So people who got blue spoons are more likely to use fertilizer in the season of the program and in the next season as well. And people who got coupons were more likely to use fertilizer. They got some discount to use fertilizer. And the cooperative treatment didn't work at all. So I think we discussed that along the way. In the same setting, we have low diffusion of fertilizer innovation, and we have very high diffusion of blue spoon in the social network. So I think this could be explained by the model that you outlined earlier, saying that if you can trace it directly to a source of authority, you can pass on it's easier to pass on the information. So things that are precise and can come with some documentation, you'll pass on. Softer information, or information that's not as verifiable, you won't. Yep.
Do you ever check if they had any difficulty measuring outcomes?
Well, they have with the teaspoon, it's very easy. The alternative is to do it with your fingers, which is very imprecise.
But if they can measure a teaspoon and divide it by
If they can or if they cannot.
if they're able to easily measure a teaspoon and multiply by
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So they can measure it themselves. They have a spoon at home.
Well, first of all, most of them don't know how much you should use. So the teaspoon tells them how to use. Second of all, we looked at both the verbal answer, like how much should you use, and then to show quantities, to have a sense of what is the visual quantities. They're even worse on visual quantities than on verbal answers. So first of all, they don't know how much they should use, and second, even if they know the number, they don't know exactly how it corresponds to physical quantity. So in practice, the way they do it is 3 fingers. So you just put your hand in the bag of fertilizer with your 3 fingers, and that's, it's usually not half a teaspoon. It's like, it is a range of what it becomes to be, but it tends to be a bit more.
Seeing that people that were unrelated to the first adopters also adopted without social network.
Yeah, so it is some of that, because 26% of people who are not a friend of the blue spoon farmer end up with a blue spoon anyway. So 26% found out about it some ways. So it could be by broadcasting through the shop, or it could be because they are a friend of a friend. We don't know. We don't have a way of having this second degree link. But about a quarter of the farmer got hold of a blue spoon anyway. And then an extra 10% if they are a friend directly. So there is something else than the broadcasting in the shop.
That might be even stronger than being a friend of a friend.
Well, it's 26% if you're not a friend of a farmer. So there is another way that we've learned from it, either through this broadcasting to the shop or via friend of a friend. And an extra 10% if you're a friend. 26 to 36. So that's kind of what we are thinking about now, along these lines. Which sort of explains why the model that I sketched out about the 2 possible equilibria is kind of still lying there, because in a sense that's not really the right model for what's going on here, because there is a lot of diffusion of that particular technology anyway. Okay, so that concludes a little bit further than later than I thought, sort of sequence about thinking about diffusion of technology in social networks. So now I'll spend the rest of the time talking about other ways in which folks in development economics study social networks, are networks. One second use of it is this business networks. So you already looked at the Kai and Seidel paper. So the idea here is the developing world, the enforcement of contract is not very good. It can take very, very long to go to court. It can, when you, in particular, you're trying to recover a loan, it's very difficult to, it might take years and years and years to get it back. So for all of these reasons, the formal, the formal institutions are not functioning very well for business practices. And in this context, having the network, the social network, could serve a role of enforcing obligations and making sure people behave well with each other, and therefore substitute for all of these formal practices. So I think the first, it might not be the first one, but the paper that really nicely make this point is Avner Greif's paper on the Maghrebi traders, which were a group of Jewish traders in the 13th century. They traded all around the Mediterranean, so they were far from each other, but they shared a common language and were, knew each other, were married to each other, etc. So they formed a social network. So his argument is that it becomes very easy for them to share information about counterparties. So what they used to do is to say they used to trade by ship, and they used to. So some person in a ship used to carry a lot of cloth for someone to send it somewhere else, and then this person had to send back something. So it potentially very long obligation that take a long time to have to be repaid, and the person who is in the boat has a lot of money on the boat that doesn't belong to him, and has kind of potentially a strong reason to find another way to sell the stuff elsewhere rather than when he was instructed to go. So how did that not happen? Well, Avner Greif's idea is that if someone didn't do what was planned, the entire network would punish the deviant trader and just exclude him from any other dealing in the future, and this created strong incentive for honest behavior. And the people who were suspected of cheating had to invest in restarting from scratch, rebuilding their reputation, and it was not worth it. So that's kind of one first description way in history of how the social network helps enforcing these mutual obligations, long-term loan that would take several months before they needed to be repaid, not collateralized in any way, and potentially a lot of temptation to escape. What's very interesting is Greif's second paper, where he shows that statically this is a very superior system. So they did very well, the Maghrebi traders did very well. But then in his second paper, 1994 paper, he compares the Maghrebi and the Genoese trader. The poor Genoese trader didn't have that advantage. They didn't. They were not in this social equilibrium where the entire network would punish deviants. It was everybody according to their own self-interest. But since they didn't have that, they could not build these collectivist strategies. So instead, they evolved a web of legitimate formal institutions, courts and stuff like that, that would actually punish people who deviate against contracts. And then eventually that proved more resilient. The Maghrebi eventually collapsed, while the Genoese trader, armed with their strong formal institutions, could actually continue to grow and succeed. So I think this is a pretty interesting parable for us to keep in mind when we're thinking about social networks. That especially in development, it's all very nice and cozy. People trading, being able to enforce favors and social insurance and the like, but there is it might be less resilient than actually formal institutions, say for example social security or something like that, as opposed to the whole village will take care of you in some way or the other. So that's something which is, if some of you are looking for things to think about, I think would actually be pretty interesting. So now let's go back to contemporary period and business networks. What are the benefits of being in a network for a firm? So in particular, it could be greater access to contracts, greater access to loans, greater access to orders and stuff like that. So in this paper by Asim Kouadja, Atif Mahen, and Mohamed Kama, they have access to data that actually could be replicated elsewhere, which is boards of directors of all the Pakistani companies, public and private. And they also have information on loans received by these companies. because the data set comes from, in that case, from the Central Bank of Pakistan. So that's where the data is from. They have the universe of listed company. They define two firms are connected if they share a common director. And two firms are in the same network if they can be linked through connected firms. Since they have the entire universe of the listed firms, they can construct networks for the whole economy. So they do find that there is one very large super network which contains 5% of firms, like the giant component. And I'll show you some images that there's actually a pretty common feature of business networks that there is a giant component. It contains 5% of firm, but 66% of the bank credit. So the question they want to ask is, to what extent this is all selection? This is because the larger firms are more likely to be in a giant component. To what extent is there some causal effect in being in the giant component? That's the question we are going to ask here. Yeah. About ownership? Yes. So with the director, you know if they are the board of director, you know if they are director with some stake or whether they are just a director in the board of directors. So there are some. I don't know if they do that in this paper, but I have another paper on using this, whether this board of directors are political appointees, where they use that distinction between ownership. Yeah, so you're going to do some. Yes, so you're going to do some. Oh, because of relationship. Yeah, correct. The family relationship are not here. So you're connected as a firm if you share a director, not if your brother shares a director. Yeah. No, that's a good question. Whether owners, I somehow have in mind that owners are on the board anyway, but it could not. It doesn't have to be. Yeah. So that there might be some ownership links that are not formally in this. Trade? I'll show that to you. Yeah.
Sorry, firms in this network, is it public firms or?
It's listed firms. So all the firms that are.
Well, but just in the super network.
Oh, public and private, both.
Oh, you have both.
Yeah, there is everybody. Yeah.
About these firms are dealing with different kinds of business.
Oh yeah, it's all the firms in Pakistan.
Yeah, so don't they tend to be in the same companies which deal with the same business
to be connected in a network? Probably. So that's a network. So this is the IDs here are the directors' names or ID corresponding to the network. So Mr. 5 is in firm C and D, so that links C and D. Mr. 2 and 3 are in A and B, so that links these two. 1 is here and here, so that links these two, so that creates a network. And then there is another network over here, and there are some isolates here.
You have the potential to talk about strength of things.
Yes, you could use absolutely. They don't do it here, but you could. This is the same thing for the USA. So you can see the giant component and then lots and lots of firms. This is the UK, similar data for the UK, India, and Pakistan. In Pakistan, the super network is actually smaller than in what it is in terms of number of firms than what it is in the USA. So it's all the firm links together, smaller like little networks, and then isolates. And the question we want to ask is there some value in terms of getting loans or businesses or stuff like that and being in a super network? So first thing you might want to do is to compare firms that are in the super network here to firms that are not. But what would be the problem with that? Yeah, it could be that the people who are in the super network, they might be in different fields, they might be bigger, etc. By definition, if you're in super network, you're likely to be bigger because you will have more directors. So likely that signs the bias in the form of like the biggest guys are in the super network. So now we could do fixed effects. So we're saying as firms enter or leave the super network, So for example, if you add a director that is connected to a firm in the supernetwork, poof, you're in the supernetwork. So now I could compare the same firm over time. That's a bit better, but it's not ideal because it could still be the case that I add a director precisely because I'm becoming bigger, or because I'm very successful. I'm this like little startup that is doing very well. Someone from the board of Google agrees to join my board. That means, you know, I'm doing very well. So this is not. I might find that over time I have a lot of growth, but it's not because I am under the network. It's because I was a lot of growth that the supernetwork lets me come in. So the idea, which is very neat, is to use incidental firm entry and exit to the network. So what is it? Is not whether new firm enter or exited the network because they added a director, but because another firm that you're connected to added or removed the director. So let's say I'm not connected to the super network. I'm connected to Ben's firm. And Ben Firms is not connected to the super network either. We have a small network of 2 firms. But then he adds a director that puts him to the super network. And poof, I'm in the super network. Nothing about me has changed. It's all about him. So that's clearly better in the sense that it is not, then we are not exploiting things that are due to changes that happen to me. It's still not ideal because there might be correlated shocks. For example, we could be in the same sectors. He does well. Someone from Google joins his board, and therefore I also entered incidentally, but I'm also doing well because we're both in the same kind of industry. That's why we share director in the same. So it's not perfect, but that's what it is. So this is an illustration of the strategy. This is the firms 1, 101, and 100, 101, 102 are connected. Can you tell? I teach till what time? 11? 11:10. 11:10. 100, 101, and 102 are connected. They are not in the giant network. Then 100 and 101 gets connected to the super network because they add a director. So suddenly 102 gets connected. Here is another strategy, a triplets of firm. And then 106 enters the network. Now these 2 are connected. That's the idea. And here are the results for borrowing. So this is just a basic fixed effects strategy. So just exploiting any form of changes. So it could be I'm adding a director or suppressing a director that is in the network. And then here we have the strategy that control for the direct entrant. So in this estimate here, we're only keeping this is only estimated off of the people who enter incidentally. It turns out the estimate is just the same. So it says that the moment I enter the network through this indirect link, I am 17% more likely to get a loan. Or the moment I leave the network because one of my friends' company lost the network, I am 17% less likely to get a loan. And then this is the same specification with the probability of default in percentage point. And you can see that you are less likely to default on a loan if you are in a network, which could be a form of, it could be the reason why you're getting more loans in the first place, that you are less likely to default from them. Yeah.
So the incidental attachment, is it exactly one of my friends who becomes attached?
It's one of my, it could be several away. Okay. It's any firms that I'm connected to. So for example, Mr. 102, I guess in this example, it's, imagine that just 100 gets in, then Mr. 102 is still entering via 100. As long as I get connected by someone I'm connected directly or indirectly, I get it.
So was there any measure?
The strength, that's a good idea. No, I don't recall. So that is something they could do. They could also think about the strength of network, as Eric was talking about, and also like whether I'm indirectly linked or directly linked. Although I don't know if it makes sense even conceptually, because once I'm a network, I'm in the network. Now, one thing that they do, which I think relates to what you're saying, is asking whether this is what they call Google rank, is some version of eigenvector centrality in the network. And you're seeing that the centrality matters. You're more likely to get a loan when you're more central once you're in the network. And you're less likely to get a loan when you're, and the effect is less when you're very central, even though you don't belong to the super network. So this matters more for small firms that don't have, they might not be small for that matter, but this matters more for firms that are otherwise more isolated. Expansion or contraction. It's accidental entry or exit. This is called entry, but it's like it's in network. It could be in net. You could lose your in network status because your friend firms has left.
But then you touched on that, but it seems that these things are very asymmetric. So do they try to explore it to see what really matters?
You're right that it's not necessarily symmetric. That because once I have established my reputation for being a good guy, etc., I might keep the loan. So the exit might be less costly than the entry. But I don't recall that they exploited.
Also look at what happens if you're in the network and some people leave, then you might have a better competitive position.
So you mean change in the shape of the network? No, the only thing they look at in this paper is whether you are part of this chain component or not. And then, like, what's your centrality anyway in the in the network, regardless of whether you belong to the super network. Then you get so this is the same strategy looking at some various channels. You get larger loans. You have more people who lend you money. Your loan is less likely to come from government banks. You're more likely to get credit from the private banks, and your loan are more likely to come from people who are lending to firms that are in your networks. So I think this is actually very interesting, this business networks idea. I really like Adam and Jing's paper on this, getting these groups together. There is a lot of interesting stuff. There is not that much else right now that I know of besides that paper and theirs. So I think that's an area where there is a lot more to be done.
So could the causal effect go the other way around? So for example, for some reason I'm lucky to get a good productivity draw, cheaper, and I'm just by myself able to borrow a lot from private banks, and because of that I'm able to join this superstar club.
Yeah, of course. That's why you have to go through this complicated strategy, because if you're absolutely right, which is you don't want to just use the entry into the network, because it could be that because I'm successful, I get a loan and I also get someone to join my bond and I join the network. So this here is the numbers that are here are coming from this specification, where this specification where I'm controlling for the direct entrance. So I'm only looking at the incidental entrance. So it's nothing you've done that got you the loan and got you. It's the entry due to someone else. Now, even that is not perfect, because it could be some general correlated shock, good shock in the industry, but at least it's not your own doing well. Absolutely. Okay, so the next stuff that I want to talk about is labor markets. So networks are very useful, like in sociology and forever. We've been talking about this Granovetter and others, Lazarsfeld talking about labor market and the use of the labor market of social network in getting jobs. And this is something which I actually think is important in developed country as well. And in fact, this paper is looking at networks of migrants. I'm going to show you two papers that are looking at networks of migrants inside the US. The first one is a very nice paper by Kaivan Munshi, who looks at migrant communities coming from Mexico. using data from the Mexican Migration Project, which can trace migrants back and forth between Mexico and the US. There are reasons why migrants will maybe have strong network effects. First of all, they are new to the labor market. They might need information, referrals, etc. And second of all, the communities tend to support each other, to be socially cohesive. So what Karen does is taking data from the Mexican Migration Project, where people they interviewed people in Mexican communities and then follow them in the US, and you have long retrospective data from these communities. So the migration is recurrent, people keep going back and forth, and a small share of them settle permanently, but some do. And you know the size of the network and the vintage of the network, how long, whether these are people who have been established for a long time or people who had just come. So what he's going to look at, the question that he asks is whether if I'm a migrant and I arrive to a city, what is the size of the established network? What is the size of the old people's network who can help me get a job? The question he wants to ask is, if that network is bigger, if there are more people like that, am I more likely to get a job? And what is a network here is people from my origin village, not just Mexicans, but people from my origin village in the city where I go to. And what he exploits is the fact that then you see in labor economics they use that idea all the time as well, is the idea that people will tend to go in the places where, because precisely of these network reasons, presumably, people will tend to migrate where they have buddies from their village, people from their village who have already gone. So of these 24 cities in Mexico, they tend to always, some place from such and such village, they go to Detroit, and such village, they go to Cleveland or whatever. So what he does, so you do need, the problem is that you'll have more migrant in Detroit when things are going well in Detroit. I should maybe put it the other way. You'll have less migrant in Detroit when things are not going well in Detroit. So the size of the migrant community is itself directly correlated with how well the economy is doing. So that's not going to be a very good instrument. So he needs a good instrument for the size of the migrant community, which is not correlated with the current US situation. And what he does is exploits a push factor to migration and looks at the rainfall in that particular village many years ago. And he's saying, look at the average rainfall 3 years ago, means that, say, the rainfall was bad. There was very low rainfall, so the situation was bad in the village. So people have left. And where they've gone is to Cleveland, because everyone from that village always goes to Cleveland. It means that in that 3 years later, there is going to be more migrants from that village in Cleveland. And we can infer that the rainfall situation in some particular village in Mexico 3 years ago is not correlated with the economic situation in Cleveland today. Yep.
Rainfall covers quite a big area, so it's likely to be correlated with a lot of village areas, right? Much larger than like personal land.
So you'd be surprised that the impact of, it's true that there is a year effect, but there is still, within a given year, there is lots of variation from village to village.
Yeah, but it's not really measured, right? So the measurement, it's usually measured in key locations and then it's updated.
Well, it's not like, you're not interested, it's not kilometer by kilometer. This is not interpolation, this is actual rainfall station data, and then the closest to that village. You're right, it could be that so this is something that is not going to create a bias. It might create a weaker first stage, because the fact that there is good rainfall for my village also means there is a good rainfall for the neighboring village, which may or may not be in the data. But it's not going to create a bias in the sense that the only thing that would create bias is if then it had an impact on the US economy. So all that it could do is that it would make the instrument weaker if to the extent that things are, I'm putting year effect in there, so to the extent that things are going well for village A, they're also going well for village B, even after putting the year effect. But you're still going to have the 24 communities are reasonably far away all over 7 states in Mexico, so you're still going to have a fair amount of variation. But that's what, we just can look at the data. And this is the rainfall in the village in Mexico. And you can see that, so this is rainfall 3 years ago, and this is the number of established migrants. And you can see that the number of established migrants really drops a lot as a function of the rainfall in Mexico 3 years ago, in the rainfall in the village in Mexico 3 years ago. So in a sense, that's, in this case, the proof of your concern is in the pudding, which is if the rainfall was just spreading a lot from village to village, there would be no first stage. And then so you see something pretty strong for the number of migrants, and then this is the employment of the new guys. And you can see a fainter but still discernible downward trend as well as a function of the past rainfall. So now we can look at that in a regression format. This is your chance of being employed in the US as a function of recent rainfall and past rainfall. And you see no effect of recent rainfall in your village in Mexico, which is encouraging. It shouldn't matter. But you see reasonably strong effect on your probability to be employed is 0.12%, 12 percentage points in your probability to be employed in the US when the rainfall was bad later. There's no effect on employment at origin. There is an effect on your probability to migrate. So you're more likely to go. You're also more likely to go if things were, if there is a larger network, which makes sense. And on the other hand, in the past, they were less likely to migrate. So the size of the network is less good when the rainfall was good. So then you can use this to do an instrumental variable, and you get this. But obviously, that's the same. You'll get from the IV what is in the reduced form, which is the more established migrant you have in a community, the more likely you are to see to be employed in the US. Then he looks at the type of employment you're getting. He doesn't have wages in the census, but in the data. But you look at the type of employment you are getting, and you are also you're less likely to be employed in agriculture, more likely to be employed in industry and services. So people would also make more money conditional on being employed. What would be nice to do in this paper is to look at that number, which is what's the effect of having more people, more new migrants. Because there with a new migrant, the effects are potentially more subtle because now they're competing with me. They might still help me out, but they're also competing with me. Unfortunately, in this paper, there is no chance to estimate it because there is no first stage for them. We saw that there is not really an effect of rainfall of the past rainfall on the probability to migrate, so we can't really interpret that number very well. But there is another paper, more recent paper by Laurie Beeman, which in a sense redoes the same exercise, but using natural randomized variation, which is for asylum seeker in the US. So he has data from the IRC, the International Rescue Committee. Sorry.
Oh, I just had a question about
recent
versus. You said at the outset that migrants tend to go back and forth.
Yeah.
So are you a recent migrant? If you're just arriving for the first time, or say you.
That's a good question. I think you're a recent migrant if you. Actually, I don't know. I should know that. Yeah. You could define it both ways. But I don't know if you're an old migrant, whether you came back again, you're an old migrant, or you are or you're a recent migrant. I don't know. I should know that.
Yeah.
lost here. Is the new migrants, are they related to the existence of previous migrants?
The new migrants, they are a little bit related. You can see it here that they are, if the rainfall was bad in the past, so if the rainfall was, let me put it that way.
I look at column 7.
Yeah, look at column 7. These are the established migrants.
But
So
negative relation.
yeah, because when the rainfall is good, they don't go.
Well, no, but still, you're holding it.
So this is when the rainfall was good, you have less established migrant when the rainfall was good in the past.
No, I want to know I'm sorry. What I want to know is the regression.
So when the
present migration, current migration, new migration, on old migration.
So new migration on old migration. So you have the reduced form here, which is you are slightly more likely to migrate when the rainfall was. So this is the reduced form of that, which is if the rainfall was good in the past, you have more established migrant, and you have.
That's not the question I'm asking.
Yeah, so I'm trying to do it by hand, but let me. I don't think there is a regression that has.
The reason I'm asking is there's an old literature on using the data of the Great Migration era of the
in the U.S.
Around 1900, and these people found that if you take towns in Italy, there'd be towns that looked almost identical, particularly in the mountains of southern Italy. One town would have a lot of migrants, another town would have few. And it turned out it depended on whether previous migrants, or the explanation was they had friends.
No, that is clear. The people will go to the town where there are people from there. People will go to the town where there are people. So people go to Detroit if people from their town in Mexico go to Detroit. That's absolutely true. What I'm trying to say, and the reason why I'm trying to do the division in my head is that it's not in the paper, is whether if fewer people have migrated in the past, it seems that you have more migration of the current one. So it goes, it's backwards.
Yeah, that's odd.
That one is backwards. Yeah.
That is the context of human social capital, I guess.
Yeah. So the whole paper is about this social capital, which is if you go. But I realize that one is surprising. If you have fewer people who have migrated in the past, you're less likely to have a job. So this social capital is less likely to work out. That's the key point of the paper, is exactly how this social capital operates. But then that should make you more likely to go, and in fact it seems to make you less likely to go, if anything. Laurie Beeman has a paper on asylum seekers in the US. So in this case, they don't get this choice of where they go. The IRC sends them randomly. Wherever there is a spot, they just allocate them randomly. So you have a chance to go where there is a lot of people from Sierra Leone when you arrive from Sierra Leone, or a lot of people from Burundi when you arrive from Burundi. So she looks at this.
I believe the government policy has been to try to group them.
So apparently, the government might be, but the IRC.
I think it was Somali.
Somali is going to.
Minneapolis.
So the IRC doesn't group them by nationalities. The IRC is NGO, so I guess they can do what they want. They group families, but they don't group ethnic group. They will send families together, so you're out of the randomization if you already know someone. But if you don't know someone specifically, people are just distributed through the US. Maybe within some strata. Like that means that we can look at these effects exploiting this random allocation of migrants in places where happens to be a lot of Somalis or not. And you can separate by there happen to be a lot of older established Somalis and newer Somalis. And there what she finds, so in this case you have a good first stage for both. You end up to a place, because you're randomly assigned to a place. It could be a place with a lot of Somalis or a place with few Somalis. She finds that if you end up in a place with a lot of older Somalis, that's good for you because the older Somalis help you finding a job. If you end up in a place with a lot of newer Somalis, that's bad for you because there are too many people competing for the same, network-generated employment opportunity. So that's another nice paper. Another one I want to briefly refer to, also by Laurie Beeman and Jeremy Magruder. It's an experiment they are doing in Kolkata where they're trying to they set up a little factory, which is really a data entry processing job, where people are working to enter stuff or do some games, some task on a computer. The task itself is not so interesting, but what is interesting is they are asking the first people who come to refer people for the job. And in some cases, randomly assigned, in some cases they're paid a function of how well the refereed person does once they join. And in some cases not. They just are paid a fixed bonus for referring someone. So what they're interested in is who is referred. And they find that the people who were initially the referees, which are the OPs, I don't even know what OPs stand for, that's what was in the paper. OPs are less likely to refer, the OPs are the first people who were hired. So the one who are referring people. They're randomly assigned the original people, original participant, I guess. Original participants are less likely to refer relatives when they get a bonus based on how well the refereed person does. And they are more likely to refer co-workers that probably they have some information that they would be good at this job. The more skilled original participants are better at identifying better people to refer. So if you're more skilled yourself, you will be better at referring people. And but in general, the more skilled original participants don't always bother. But if they are given a bonus based on the productivity of the guy, they're more likely to make a referral. So the bottom line is that the workers have information from different type of relationships they have these people, family relationship and working relationships. But this goes against but they're not necessarily willing to use that information, first of all. And second of all, the information they do have competes with their need to provide favors within the network. So without, when they are not identified, when they are not incentivized for the performance of their referees, they are going to tend to give the job to their family member, even if they know that they are co-workers or other people they have information with who would be better at the job. So that is something that of course, is the reciprocal thing of the next thing I want to study, which is the one big topic of social network use in social network in development, which is mutual insurance. That the social networks are networks of exchange, favor trading, and helping each other in case of needs. And that's in the absence of formal insurance in a lot of developing countries is a pretty essential social safety net. This is a huge literature in development. People absolutely love studying social insurance. So it's been kind of studied a little bit to death. Why would the social network be, good? They have good information and they have good ability to punish, which in the absence of, in settings of limited commitment where you have informal insurance, how does it work? When things go well for me, I contribute to other people. When things go badly for me, the pool contributes to me. So in principle, the contribution to the pool are independent of any past history. They're only dependent on how well or poorly I'm doing today. But of course, the people who are doing well today have a strong temptation to say, well, I'm doing well, let me quit that silly arrangement. What keeps them together is the fact that if they defect today, they might not be helped in the future, plus any form of informal social sanction that the network might apply. So these are things that are in principle somewhat unstable, because if you feel that other people are going to defect in the future, the probability, the value for you not to defect today is lower, because there's some chance that the whole arrangement is going to collapse anyway. So these are things where they could be very easily be multiple steady state, ones with a lot of social insurance, ones with very little. The social sanction over and above the value, the insurance value of the network, the social sanction, opprobrium, whatever, shaving your head or whatever the thing is, helps coordinate helps ruling out the equilibrium where there is no insurance whatsoever. So most of the papers, original papers in development, start with the idea that the entire village is a social network. So they have no idea of who actually helps who, but they consider that the village is a network. So the form of the regression that you see people running, for example, Townsend using the ECOSET data in India, is looking at whether my own consumption is more correlated with my own income stream or with the village income stream, and finding that the village income stream accounts for a lot of the variation in individual consumption. Very lovely paper by Chris Udry on Nigeria, who studies loan individual loans. He has all the data on the loans, and what he shows is that I repay more on a loan when my lender is doing poorly, which of course shouldn't be in a loan contract. I should repay whatever I owe. Now I'm not able to repay if things are not doing well for me, so my own state could influence how much I repay, but it shouldn't be the case that the state of my receiver influence how much I repay, and he finds that. So basically he finds that people use a blend of credit and insurance, things that products that look like halfway between credit and insurance in Nigerian villages. Now the social network could well be smaller or larger than the village. It could be smaller because it could be restricted to neighbors, it could be restricted to caste groups, it could be restricted to kin groups, it could be restricted to occupation groups. It could be larger because the caste group or family group could extend beyond the village. We were just discussing at breakfast a very nice, somewhat crazy paper by Rosenzweig and Stark, old paper, arguing that people marry their daughter to villages where the rain covers less with the rain in your village. So in this way, you form a network that says the family relationship, that when things go well for you, they go badly for you, and you can insure each other. The idea is very nice. I'm not sure if I believe that it's actually there in the data, but regardless, it's a pretty nice idea. So that's the idea of like the network extending potentially way beyond the village in the family network. Frank Grimart looked instead of consumption smoothing in Côte d'Ivoire and show that there is no consumption smoothing within the same village outside of your ethnic group. So the consumption smoothing is within ethnic group as opposed to being within the village. If that is the case, then the network could be endogenous to the technology that exists to share money. First, you need to be able to, in order to share, to be in a social network with someone, you need to be able to have the information. You need to be able to have the good enforcement. That's why marrying your daughter is a good thing, because they have her. And you need to be able to have a technology to share the money. And that means that, I'm going to skip that actually, maybe I'll come back to it. That means that the social network could be endogenous to the technology, to send money. So here is a nice paper by Tavneet Suri and Billy Jack, where they look at mobile money in Kenya. So there is a mobile money is called M-Pesa, and it exists now in other countries as well, but it's in Kenya that it's first developed very fast. And the idea is that you can send an SMS to someone on their phone, and with that phone, so you go to a shop, you give 100 shilling to a shopkeeper, you send an SMS to someone, they go with their phone and the code in the SMS to another shop, and that shopkeeper gives them 100 shilling. So for a tiny, tiny fee, you can transmit money, and it works very well, and people use it a lot. So that has really completely changed. So they argue that has completely changed the game in your ability to insure with friends and families who are aware, because before that, the only way to send money to someone was to physically transfer the money. So if your son or daughters were in Nairobi and something went badly at home, you could call them to tell them something's going badly, but they would need to find some friend to give them the money or something like that. It would be quite complicated. So the idea is that now you would be able to ensure with a wider, network, people that you might be in social network, but before you could not really talk to very easily. So what they run is a regression saying that suppose let's look at your consumption. Suppose you have a back shock today, and you are using the technology of M-Pesa. They have differences both across people and over time. Is it the case that the user of M-Pesa suffer less for their consumption from a bad shock? So the different type of bad shocks, I'll move directly to this. There are some weather shocks, there are illness shocks, and there are non-health consumption, other kind of bad shocks like accidents or something like that. So they look at them both separately. So it's a bad shock. So just looking at this cross-sectional regression, you have, so if you have a negative shock, you consume less. If you're an M-Pesa user, you tend to consume more. So the M-Pesa user, people with cell phone, etc., they tend to be richer. But the M-Pesa user who have a shock are less affected than the non-M-Pesa user. Now, the problem with that regression is that it could be that these guys who have M-Pesa, they are richer, they also have savings and stuff like that. They have generally better at ensuring shocks, so maybe that's not the reason. So the first thing they do is to say, well, let's look at the introduction of M-Pesa over time. M-Pesa was introduced, they have a panel where at the beginning, let's say half the people use M-Pesa, and at the end, almost everybody does it. So you can look at people who become user of M-Pesa and look at whether these people who become user of M-Pesa become more able to insure against shocks. And in addition, they are going to control for all of the characteristics they can observe about the people, like their assets, how much land they have, how much savings they have, and interact them with the shocks. And when you do all that, you still find that the user of M-Pesa seem to be, so the people, now you can read that people who have become user of M-Pesa over time are better insured against negative shocks. So that seems to be quite robust finding. It seems to be true for the weather shocks, particularly strongly, less so for the illness shock, and that is interesting because illness is something that is not very well insured by the social network. People seem to have found that over and over and over again. Might be because there is more moral hazard in being sick or the treatment. Or might be because the sum involved are very large and it might be harder for the social network to insure. Another strategy that they employ is to, maybe I'll skip that, but another strategy that they employ is to, instead of looking at whether you are a user of M-Pesa, is looking at whether you have access to M-Pesa because there is an agent in your neighborhood. So they're exploiting the rollout of M-Pesa over time. So this is a reduced form of that, and you find the same thing. If you have more agents in your neighborhood, you are better insured against shocks. That seems to be very robust to anything they do. So, or if you are further from an agent, you are less insured against shocks. This is the agents before the program was actually implemented, and you see that it had no effect before, so that's encouraging. And this is the mechanism, which is pretty interesting. You're more likely to receive anything, because they are asking people whether they've received remittances. People who have gotten a shock and who have received a shock and who are users are more likely to receive any remittances. They've received more unique instances. And they've received more from, I want to see, there was one that, yes, exactly. Then the money has come from from more senders. So the money has come from more senders when you are a user of M-Pesa. So you get a lot of you get money from a lot of people, and this is the fraction of your network. So they try to identify who could possibly help you, and you have a larger share of people who could possibly help you come and pitch in. So basically what the M-Pesa technology does is, because it reduces the cost of any individual remittances, it activates a larger fraction of your network. Okay, I'll finish with this example. Yeah.
I know that you depend on me because there are really very few people you can turn to for help. You come to me and you're in trouble, you come over help. But now that I know that you can ask thousands of people, in Nairobi or wherever,
yeah.
I might be less inclined to help you. As a public good, free riding.
Yeah.
Is that, so you could, that could be quite perverse, then there could be a great amount of solidarity. Is there any reason to think?
So I wonder whether one could look at whether the identity, this is just the share of people who help you. The share of people who help you increase. One wonder whether one could look at whether it's different people who are now help you. So the big guy in the village is less likely to come and help everybody because he knows that, maybe you also decide not to go to help for the big guy in the village because you can ask your son who is in Nairobi. I don't look at that in that level of granularity, but it would be interesting. Okay, last thing that I want to quickly cover is, if networks are used to exchange favors, then they might also in turn be affected by the need for those favors. So I guess this is a very, very natural transition to this idea that I don't need to come to talk to the big guy in the village now that I have my son in the city. Or maybe the big guy in the village is also less interested in helping me because he knows that I could ask my son in the city. So the network could become endogenous to the need of insurance. And then the relationship to people could become endogenous to the need of insuring each other. And therefore changes in social changes, development, etc., could affect the shape of the social network. So with our beloved Karnataka villages, we have an example of that with the microfinance introduction. So if you remember what we discussed when we discussed the diffusion of microfinance, the MFI, the microfinance institution we worked with, told us they would enter 75 villages. So we surveyed the social network in 75 villages. Then for any number of reasons, they only entered 35 villages. They kind of ran out of existence for a macro shock on microfinance in India, unrelated to our villages. So they only entered 35 of those villages. So what we look at is whether, what happened to the social network. Then we went back and redid a survey of social network in those villages, and we look at how it's affected by the entry of microfinance. So it's a very basic, simple difference in difference. I'll show you the aggregate data first. So it's a difference in difference. This is our post data. So you have the density, so the number of links that exists after in the second survey in microfinance villages and the interaction of the two. What is of interest here is the interaction of the two. And you can see that there is less density, fewer links, and people are less close when microfinance in the microfinance villages post. So it seems to be that microfinance has destroyed links, which is somewhat surprising, you would think, because one thing that microfinance does is putting people in groups where they're supposed to talk to each other. So first order effect might be for people to talk to each other. So what could be happening? What might be happening is that, well, now that you have access to microfinance, you have a better outside option with credit, which means that you need to make friends with others less, because if you need money for something or the other, you always have access to the microfinance contract instead. Yeah.
Sorry, is it destroying just so you asked for the links, you asked a bunch of questions, including questions about lending, but also questions like going
yes.
to did it have an effect on the ones that were?
Yep, I'll show you that. I'll show you that in a minute. I'm coming to that. So what so on the other hand, you could say that, well, now you're able to relend, or so it could increase your value to create links. But first order effect is probably that for people who are likely to borrow for microfinance, this would decrease the need to make friends. And therefore, you might make less efforts, you know, like being social with people, going to the market square, etc. Now, if the people who are very likely to borrow from microfinance are less likely to show up and make friends, other people who are not themselves likely to borrow from microfinance, they know that if they go to the market square and try and make friends, nobody will be there because people, so therefore even their link might go down even though they are not themselves borrowing from microfinance. So in terms of looking at these externalities, you could ask your question, which is financial versus non-financial link, and you could also ask the questions of people who are likely to borrow from microfinance and people who are not. So what we do is that we use the demographic and network data to estimate for every person the probability to borrow from microfinance. Then we compute this propensity score in treatment villages and in control villages, in villages where microfinance didn't enter. And then we're looking at who is losing the links. And we're finding that everybody loses link. This is all in the, but the people who are, the links that are the most likely to disappear are actually the link between the people who are not very likely to borrow and other people who are not very likely to borrow. So that's the first externalities, is from the people who are very likely to borrow lose link, and then those who are less likely to borrow lose even more links. The second externality is the one you were talking about, which is that if it's really something about, well, now you don't need to make friends to discuss finances, then you also don't need to make friends at all. So non-financial links are maybe also disappearing. So this separates our 13 links between anything involving finances or borrowing, etc., and anything not involving finances, friendship, temple, information, and the like. And you're seeing that the coefficients are basically on top of each other. So the effect of, this is destruction of links, the effect on the destruction of link is as large for non-information link and information link. This is the creation of links, creation of new links. So this is all the possible dyads that didn't have a link before, whether they create a link. And there we don't see a differential effect for the low type guys, but you still find that people are less likely to create new links. So I'll stop here. And thank you very much for staying till the very end.
I have a comment to make about networks, which is perhaps the most, well, without a doubt, the most important link that the summer school has